The arrival of Zara Marcus Chen wiped the grease from his hands as the familiar hum of an approaching courier ship filled the air around. Mining Station Omega-9. The remote outpost sat on the edge of human territory, a lonely speck of civilization surrounded by the vast emptiness of space. As the station's only human mechanic, Marcus had grown accustomed to the isolation, finding comfort in the predictable routine of maintaining the mining equipment that kept this place running. The ship that descended through the artificial atmosphere was sleek and alien in design, its hull gleaming with the distinctive purple-black metal favored by the Vexery Empire. Marcus had never seen a Vexery courier before. The previous delivery pilot had been a chatty Altarian who always brought news from the inner colonies. This was definitely not him. The ship's landing gear extended with mechanical precision, touching down on the designated pad with barely a whisper of displaced air. Marcus found himself straightening his worn jumpsuit, suddenly conscious of his appearance. 3 years on this remote station had made him casual about such things, but something about this arrival felt different. The ship's cargo door hissed open, and out stepped the most striking alien Marcus had ever encountered. She was tall, easily 6.5 feet, with scaled skin that shifted between deep emerald and midnight blue, depending on how the light caught it. Her face was angular and elegant, with large golden eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. 2 small horns curved back from her forehead, and her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid that reached halfway down her back. She moved with the controlled grace of a predator, each step deliberate and confident. Her courier uniform was standard issue, but on her frame it looked almost military. A long tail swished behind her as she approached, and Marcus noticed how her clawed hands rested casually near the energy weapon at her hip. "Marcus Chen," she said, her voice carrying the distinctive hissing accent of the Vexery. It wasn't a question. Golden eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him feel like prey being evaluated by a hunter. "I am Zara Vexvani. I will be handling courier services for this sector." "That's me," Marcus replied, managing to keep his voice steady despite the alien's intimidating presence. "What happened to Kelix?" "He's been running this route for 2 years. Reassigned," Zara said, curtly, already moving toward her ship's cargo hold. "The Vexery Courier Guild has taken over this contract. We are more efficient." Marcus followed at a respectful distance, noting how her tail twitched with what seemed like irritation. Everything about her posture screamed that she wanted this interaction to be as brief as possible. She retrieved a sealed container, marked with the mining station's designation, and returned to him with the same predatory grace. "Supply delivery for mining station Omega-9, she stated, extending the container. When their hands briefly touched during the exchange, Marcus felt a shock run through him. Not electrical, but something else entirely. Zara's eyes widened slightly, and she pulled back with perhaps more haste than necessary. "Thank you," Marcus said, studying her face for any sign of what had just happened. "How long have you been working courier routes?" "That is not relevant to this transaction," Zara replied, but her voice had lost some of its edge. She was already backing toward her ship. "Is there anything else requiring delivery?" "No, this is everything I was expecting." Marcus found himself reluctant to let her leave. Life on Omega-9 was lonely, and even a brief conversation with another sentient being was a welcome break from the isolation. "How do you like the Outer Rim territories?" "I know it's pretty different from Vexori space." Zara paused, her golden eyes studying him with what might have been curiosity. "The Outer Rim is ... acceptable, fewer complications than the inner systems." She seemed to catch herself revealing too much and stiffened. I must complete my route. Good day, Engineer Chen. She turned and strode back to her ship with that same liquid grace, leaving Marcus standing alone on the landing pad. As her ship lifted off and disappeared into the star-filled void, he realized he was still holding his breath. Something about the encounter had left him unsettled, though he couldn't quite identify what. Over the following weeks, Zara's visits became the highlight of Marcus's routine. She maintained her professional demeanor, but he began to notice small changes. Her deliveries, which should have been weekly, started arriving every few days. Sometimes the containers held items clearly meant for other stations, forcing her to return with corrections to her route planning. This shipment was designated for mining station Theta 7. She would say, standing in his doorway with a package that was obviously meant for him. My navigation system experienced a calibration error. Theta 7 is 3 systems away, Marcus would point out gently, accepting the package anyway. Vexery navigation technology is still adapting to this sector, she would reply, but her usual confidence seemed strained. During these increasingly frequent visits, Marcus noticed other changes as well. Zara's movements had grown more restless, her tail switching with what seemed like agitation. Her golden eyes had begun to glow with a subtle inner light that he found mesmerizing. Most noticeably, her scent had changed. What had initially been a clean, almost metallic smell now carried hints of something warmer, more complex. Something that made his pulse quicken in ways he didn't entirely understand. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked during one of her correction visits. "You seem ... different lately." Zara's scales shifted to a darker hue, and she took a step back from him. Vexery physiology is experiencing seasonal adjustments. It is a normal biological process. Seasonal adjustments. Marcus had done some research on Vexery biology after her first visit, but the information in the station's database was limited. The Vexery were notoriously private about their personal lives. "The cycles of different worlds affect us differently than humans," she said, her voice tight. "I will adapt soon." But she didn't seem to be adapting. If anything, her condition appeared to be worsening. Her visits grew longer, and she would often find excuses to linger. She would inspect his equipment, claiming to notice efficiency problems that needed addressing. She would stand closer than necessary when handing him packages, her breathing shallow and rapid. "Your atmospheric recycler is operating at suboptimal parameters," she observed during what should have been a routine delivery. Instead of her usual quick departure, she was examining the unit mounted outside his quarters. "It's been like that for months," Marcus admitted. "Station maintenance keeps saying they'll get to it, but we're pretty low priority out here." "I could adjust it," Zara offered, moving to stand beside him. This close, he could see the fine details of her scales, the way they seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. Vexery ships use similar atmospheric systems. As she worked on the unit, Marcus found himself studying her more openly. Her movements had grown increasingly fluid over the past weeks, almost hypnotic. The way she moved her hands over the controls was precise but somehow sensual. When she reached up to access the higher settings, her uniform pulled taut across her form, and Marcus forced himself to look away. "There," she said, stepping back. The recycler's hum immediately smoothed into a more pleasant tone. "Much more efficient. Thanks, I owe you one," Marcus said, then noticed something that made his breath catch. Zara's pupils had dilated until they were almost completely round, and she was breathing heavily despite the simple task she'd just completed. Perhaps, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I could check your other systems as well. Ensure they are operating correctly. The suggestion hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither quite acknowledged. Marcus's pulse quickened, but before he could respond, Zara seemed to catch herself. Her scales flushed a deeper blue, and she backed away rapidly. I must complete my route, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Other deliveries are waiting, Zara. Marcus called as she reached her ship. She paused but didn't turn around. If you ever need anything at all, I'm here. She stood motionless for a long moment, her tail twitching with what looked like internal conflict. I will remember that, she said finally, before disappearing into her ship. That night, Marcus researched everything he could find about Vex, biology and social customs. What he discovered made his blood run cold. The seasonal adjustments Zara had mentioned were actually something much more serious. The Vexari experience biological cycles similar to those of Earth's reptiles, but with a crucial difference. During these periods, they became extremely vulnerable, both physically and emotionally. In Vexari society, individuals going through these cycles were protected by their clan groups, never left alone or forced to interact with strangers. But Zara was alone out here, far from her homeworld and her people. And if Marcus's calculations were correct, her condition was only going to get worse. Asterisk. Trust in the heat. Marcus barely slept that night, his mind racing with what he'd learned about Vexari biology. When Zara's ship appeared on his sensors the next morning, arriving hours earlier than usual, he was already waiting on the landing pad. She emerged from her craft, moving with jerky, agitated motions, her tail lashing behind her in clear distress. Emergency delivery, she announced, though her voice cracked on the words. Priority medical supplies. Very urgent. She handed him a package that was clearly marked as routine electronics components, her hands trembling visibly. Her scales had shifted to a pattern Marcus had never seen before, dark blue shot through with streaks of gold that seemed to pulse. With her heartbeat, most concerning of all, her scent had intensified dramatically, filling the air around them with that warm, complex aroma that made his head spin. Zara, Marcus said gently, there's no medical emergency here. This is just standard circuit boards. Her golden eyes met his, and he saw desperation there that cut straight through his heart. I know, she whispered. I just ... I could not stay away. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Marcus took a careful step closer, noting how her breathing had grown rapid and shallow. What's really happening here? And don't tell me it's seasonal adjustments. Zara's composure finally cracked. A sound escaped her throat that was half sob, half growl. I am entering Joktal, she said, the Vexari words heavy with shame. Your language would call it ... heat cycle. It happens every few years, and during this time we become ... She struggled for the right words. Vulnerable, dependent. We require the presence of trusted individuals, or we can become dangerous. Dangerous how? To ourselves, to others. She wrapped her arms around herself protectively. The biological imperative becomes overwhelming. Without the calming presence of clan bonds, we can lose control entirely, hurt ourselves trying to escape the sensation or lash out at anyone nearby. Marcus felt the pieces clicking into place. That's why you've been coming here so often. You're trying to fight it. I thought I could manage alone, Zara said, her voice barely audible. I have always been strong, independent. But the isolation here, combined with the cycle, I am losing. The battle. She looked up at him with those glowing golden eyes, and Marcus saw fear there alongside the desperation. You are the only being on this entire route who has shown me kindness without expecting anything in return. Your presence calms the fire in my blood, but I know it is not fair to burden you with this. Marcus didn't hesitate. You're not a burden. How long does this cycle last? 3 to 5 days at its peak intensity. But Marcus, you do not understand. During Jactal, Vexery become extremely ... responsive to certain stimuli. Our emotional barriers break down completely. I will likely say and do things that ... She trailed off, scales flushing darker. Things that you normally wouldn't. Things that would be appropriate only between bonded mates, she said firmly. I will not have you think poorly of me when this passes. Marcus surprised himself by reaching out and gently taking one of her clawed hands in his. She gasped at the contact, her scales rippling with shifting colors. Zara, I've been alone on this station for 3 years. Do you really think I'm going to judge you for being vulnerable? She stared at their joined hands as if she couldn't quite believe what was happening. Your species ... Humans are so different from mine, so accepting of things that would bring shame to Vexery. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, Marcus said. Come on, let's get you inside. You look like you're about to collapse. He led her to his quarters, noting how she seemed to lean into his presence, her breathing steadying slightly when he was near. The living space was simple but comfortable, with a large window overlooking the mining operations and a small kitchen area where he prepared his meals. This is your dwelling, Zara observed, looking around with those sharp golden eyes. It smells like you. Is that good or bad? Good, she said, without hesitation. Very good. Safe. She moved to the center of the room and seemed to finally relax slightly, her tail curling round her feet. I have not felt safe in weeks. Marcus busied himself preparing tea, giving her space to acclimate while keeping himself within her line of sight. He'd read that isolation during Jactal could be physically painful for Vexery, that they needed the presence of trusted individuals like humans needed air to breathe. Tell me about your homeworld, he said, settling into a chair across from where she sat on his couch. What's it like there? Zara accepted the offered cup gratefully, wrapping her clawed hands around its warmth. Vexa Prime is a world of vast forests and deep canyons. The trees grow so tall they seem to touch the stars, and the rivers run silver with mineral deposits from the mountains. Her voice grew wistful. I have not seen it in over 2 years. Why did you leave? My clan believed I was too independent, too willing to challenge traditional ways. They arranged a bonding contract with a male I had never met, one who would temper my wild nature. Her scales darkened with remembered anger. I chose exile instead. That must have been difficult. It was the right choice, she said firmly. Then her expression softened. Though I admit, there are times when the loneliness becomes overwhelming. Vexery are not meant to be solitary creatures. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their respective worlds and the paths that had brought them to this remote corner of space. Marcus found himself fascinated by Zara's descriptions of Vexery culture, while she seemed equally curious about human customs and perspectives as the day wore on. He noticed the signs of her condition becoming more pronounced. Her scales shifted through increasingly complex patterns, and she began to move restlessly, unable to sit still for more than a few minutes at a time. Most telling of all, She began to position herself closer and closer to him, until she was sitting on the floor directly beside his chair. "The proximity helps," she explained when she noticed his questioning look. "Your presence, ... It dampens the fire somehow. I apologize if this makes you uncomfortable." "It doesn't," Marcus assured her, and was surprised to realize how true that was. Despite her intimidating appearance and predatory grace, he felt completely at ease with Zara nearby. "Actually, I like having the company." She looked up at him with something like wonder in her golden eyes. "You truly do not mind, even knowing what I am going through, especially knowing what you're going through," he said. "Everyone deserves to have someone they can trust when they're vulnerable." Zara's response was interrupted by the sound of approaching ships. Marcus moved to the window and cursed under his breath. 3 vessels were descending toward the station, bearing the markings of the Corvani Syndicate. The reptilian crime organization occasionally visited the outer rim stations, usually looking for easy targets or black market opportunities. "What is it?" Zara asked, moving to join him at the window. The moment she saw the ships, her entire body went rigid. "Corvani, they must have detected my condition somehow." "What do you mean?" "Vexery and Jactel give off certain chemical signals. To most species they're barely detectable, but to the Korvani ... double quotes. She backed away from the window, fear plain in her voice. "They consider us delicacies during this cycle. The biochemical changes make us extremely valuable in their illegal trade networks." Marcus felt anger surge through him at the thought of anyone trying to exploit Zara's vulnerable state. "They're not getting anywhere near you. This station has defensive systems against 3 Corvani raiders." "Marcus, those systems haven't been updated in years, and Corvani ships are built for combat." She was beginning to pace again, her movements agitated. "I should leave. If I'm not here, they'll have no reason to bother you." "You're not going anywhere," Marcus said firmly. "In your condition, you'd be completely helpless alone against them. Then what do you suggest?" Marcus was already moving toward his equipment locker, pulling out tools and components he'd been meaning to use for routine maintenance. "I suggest we remind them why humans have a reputation for being dangerously creative when protecting what matters to us." He began connecting devices with practiced efficiency, Zara watching with growing amazement as he improvised modifications to the station's systems. "What are you doing?" "Leveling the playing field," Marcus replied grimly. "The mining equipment on this station includes some very powerful energy systems. With a few modifications, those miners can become quite effective weapons." Over the next hour, as the Corvani ships established an orbit around the station, Marcus worked with focused intensity. He rerouted power systems, modified targeting protocols, and improvised solutions with whatever materials he had available. Zara stayed close beside him, her presence both calming him and motivating him to work faster. "The Corvani are hailing the station," she reported, monitoring the communication systems. "They're demanding I be turned over to them. Let me guess, they're claiming I'm harboring stolen property or something equally ridiculous. Close. They say I'm a dangerous criminal who has violated quarantine protocols." Despite their dire situation, there was admiration in her voice as she watched him work. "Your species truly is remarkable. Under extreme pressure, you become more capable, not less." "We're stubborn that way," Marcus agreed, making final adjustments to his improvised defense system. "There. The mining lasers are now tied into the station's targeting system. and I've boosted their power output by about 300%. Will it be enough? Marcus looked at her, taking in her frightened but determined expression, the way she'd stayed by his side throughout the crisis. Instead of fleeing to save herself, for you, it'll have to be. The Corvani made their move just as the twin suns set behind the horizon, thinking darkness would give them an advantage. They were wrong. Marcus had spent 3 years learning every centimeter of this station, and his modifications had turned it into a fortress. The first raider ship fell to a precisely targeted mining laser that punched straight through its shields. And Hull, the second, managed to land before being disabled by an electromagnetic pulse Marcus had jury-rigged from the ore processing equipment. The third attempted to flee, but found its engines mysteriously failing thanks to a computer virus Marcus had uploaded during their initial approach. "It's over," Marcus said, watching the last Corvani ship drift helplessly in space. "Station security from the inner colonies will be here within hours to clean up the mess." Zara stared at him with something approaching awe. "You defeated 3 combat vessels using mining equipment." "I had good motivation," Marcus replied, then found himself captured by her intense golden gaze. The excitement and danger of the past few hours had left them both energized, and he was suddenly very aware of how close she was standing, how her scales had shifted to those mesmerizing gold-streaked patterns. "Marcus," she said softly, "I need you to know something. When this cycle passes, I will still remember everything. How you protected me, cared for me, never once made me feel ashamed of what I was going through." She reached out and touched his face with one clawed hand, the contact sending shivers through both of them. In Vexari culture, such actions create bonds that last lifetimes. "Good," Marcus said, covering her hand with his own, "because I don't plan on letting you face anything alone ever again." The days that followed were intense but peaceful. Marcus cared for Zara through the worst of her cycle, providing the steady presence she needed while respecting the boundaries she set. They talked for hours, shared meals, and slowly built a connection that transcended species barriers. When biological cycle finally ended, she didn't immediately return to her Courier route. Instead, she requested a transfer to permanent service in the Omega-9 sector, citing the need for more frequent supply runs to the remote station. "The mining operations here are expanding," she reported to her superiors with a perfectly straight face. "Regular supply deliveries will be essential." Marcus never questioned the sudden increase in his supply needs, just as he never mentioned that half the items she delivered were things he'd never actually requested. What mattered was that they'd found something rare in the vast loneliness of space, understanding, trust, and the beginning of something that neither of them was quite ready to name. But both were willing to explore, and if the other Courier pilots sometimes wondered why Zara Dexvani seemed so much happier on her new route, well, that was between her and the stars.